So page number 20 of the syllabus, and we're going to be moving into the writing of Hosea, and so that'll be the next prophet in line, and that's what we'll spend today noting. But in your outline, you'll note that we've just done Jonah and Amos, two prophets to the north. Jonah's actually a prophet to the north, but he's working in the northern kingdom of Israel, but he's sent to Nineveh, so prophet in the time of Jeroboam.
And then Judah into the northern kingdom of Israel, and he's prophesying against Jeroboam also, and a little bit prophecy against Jerusalem. So when you're looking at Judah, this is during the time of Uzziah, and Uzziah is noted here in 2 Kings 14. If you would turn to that real quick. 2 Kings 14. And so in verse 21, all the people of Judah took Azariah, who was 16 years old, made him king in the place of his father Amaziah. So he can be called Azariah. Don't let that confuse you. We're just going to call him Uzziah because that's the name he can also be known by.
Is Uzziah and Amaziah is the same person?
Uzziah and Azariah. We'll note him as Uzziah.
My Bible says Amaziah. Is that?
No, that's another person.
Okay.
Yeah. Azariah's father was Amaziah, but Azariah can also be known as Uzziah. That confuse you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too.
How do you spell Uzziah?
Right here in your outline, Uzziah. He's going to reign for 52 years, and he starts reigning when he's 16 years old. So 2 Kings 15, verses 1 and 2, 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Azariah, known as Uzziah also, son of Amaziah, king of Judah, became king. He was 16 years old when he became king. He reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. So his dad married a Jerusalem girl. His character is found in 2 Kings 15, verse 3. He did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah done. See, we're dealing with kings of Judah, so we get a few good ones out of the bunch. We don't get any good ones out of the northern kingdom of Israel. Only rotten to the core kings. 2 Kings 15, verse 4 notes the spiritual condition of the kingdom only. And as soon as you say that word only, you could probably fill in the blanks right there. What was not taken out of the way?
The high places.
The high places, yeah. So only the high places were not taken away. People still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. And we're going to see a little bit later on a king who's going to come along and take all those out too. But it's too late. Now this is the outline for Hosea. You didn't have to write out the outline for Hosea, did you?
No, sir.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated. So, God's love for backsliders is the one this particular chart notes. You see the key words down there at the bottom on this chart: know, mercy, hear, love, return. Israel used 44 times. Ephraim used 37 times. Of course, Ephraim is a synonym. It's another word that can be used for the northern kingdom of Israel. Judah is used 15 times, and I will, and the phrase of Jehovah, of the Lord, 57 times. So it's going to talk about God's love for his people. And he's going to enter into the thought of, I'm your husband, you're my wife. So always keep that in mind when you're looking at Hosea. I'm your husband, you're my wife. And keep in mind that Hosea has a wife. Her name is Gomer. Don't get her mixed up with Gomer Pyle.
Shazam.
Her name was Gomer before Gomer Pyle's name was Gomer. I don't know why you'd ever name a kid Gomer, but that's going to be Hosea. So we come to the next page of the syllabus, and you'll note the prosperity of Uzziah. So as Judah is moving along, following after God, haven't taken down the high places, but they're getting involved in building, and they're very successful. We're going to see right around this time is when Hosea is going to prophesy, but this is also the time that Jeroboam II is going to die. 2 Kings 14, verses 28 and 29, and this is the last time that Israel will have any prosperity. But verses 28 and 29 of 2 Kings 14, now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam and all that he did and his might, how he fought, how he recovered for Israel, Damascus and Hamath, which had belonged to Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jeroboam slept with his fathers, even the kings of Israel, and Zechariah his son became king in his place. Now, from this point on, and this will be from king number 15 on in Israel, things are going to get really difficult. Because if you note in your syllabus, Zechariah is only going to reign for 6 months, which means that as soon as the king gets into power, somebody assassinates him. So it is really a period of anarchy from this point on. So from king 15 right on to king number 20, in the northern kingdom of Israel, it's really anarchy. History-wise, Assyria is right to the north. Assyria is getting ready to move into the land. That would be under Sennacherib. That's very well attested to by books of history. Books of history note the Assyrians and Sennacherib. Meanwhile, Uzziah is going to be doing well in the southern kingdom, Judah. Now, if you'll turn to the book of Hosea, we're going to take a look at God's message really to both Judah and Israel. And if you'll note in Hosea 1 verse 1, it says, the word of the Lord which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah, see there's our king of Judah, Jotham, that's going to be the next king. And by the way, he's a good king. And Ahaz and Hezekiah. Now Ahaz is going to be an evil king. So you got a good king, an evil king, and then a good king. So Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the times of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So he is going to start his prophesying just before Jeroboam II dies. But since from that point of Jeroboam dying, the prosperity of the northern kingdom of Israel goes down very rapidly. And it's a period of anarchy, and so this is a perfect message for them. But God's not going to spend much more time with the northern kingdom of Israel. He's going to be focusing in his prophets with the southern kingdom of Judah. But there's no way that any of these people will ever be able to say, well, you didn't tell us. You didn't tell us this was going to happen. Oh, yes. He told them. The meaning of the name Hosea is salvation or deliverance. The root word for Hosea is the same as Heshua, Joshua, and of course in the Greek, Jesus, which is Jesus. And so this is the same root word, Hosea. So his name means salvation, deliverance. and occurs 5 times as a proper name in the Old Testament, just as Hosea. This Hosea is the best known of the times that it's noted in the Old Testament. He is referred to as the son of Beeri. It's noted right here in Hosea 1 and verse 1. And we don't know anything about Hosea the son of, we don't know anything about Beeri, who Beeri is. But for the people of the time who would be listening to him, obviously, well, who is that Hosea? Well, that's Hosea the son of Beeri. And he preached in the northern kingdom. If you look over here at Hosea 5 in verse 1, he says, "Hear this, O priest, give heed, O house of Israel. Listen, O house of the king, for the judgment applies to you." And he goes on and notes down here in verse 3, "I know Ephraim and Israel is not hidden from me." So some of the preaching is going into the northern kingdom of Israel. And as it applies to the northern kingdom of Israel, this is just sort of God's last message. The last message is very basic. You're my wife, I'm your husband. And let me remind you of what you have done to me as that husband. Now, this work falls within also the lifetime of Isaiah. So we're starting to get just a little bit into the time of Isaiah. When you look at the reign of Ahaz and Hezekiah of Judah, you're getting into the prophesying of Isaiah. So Isaiah will be following along here rather quickly, just at least the first part of Isaiah. And it's quite possible that his prophecy right here in Hosea extended over a period of more than 60 years. But little is known of Hosea other than what we see from his writing. And he probably, because of the time frame that we're looking at, he probably lived to see the decline and fall of the northern kingdom of Israel. The time of the writing is somewhere in the 750 to 725. 750 to 725. Now, when you're looking at the northern kingdom of Israel and you're looking at the Assyrians start coming in with a king by the name of Tiglath-Pileser III. That's a mouthful. Tiglath-Pileser III. And he's reigning from 745 to 727. And then Shalmaneser V, who is probably the best known of those kings, reigned from 726 to 722. And he's the one who's reigning when the northern kingdom of Israel is taken away into Assyrian captivity. That's Shalmaneser V.
What was his time frame?
His time, Shalmaneser's time frame, 726 to 722. He just reigns for 4 years. And then Tiglath-Pileser III is from 745 to 727. And the date for the writing of Hosea is somewhere around the 750 to 725 time period. So we see the death of Jeroboam II. We see Assyria's rise to power, and that's all taking place right here within this time frame. And we also see a war that I'm going to refer to on occasion, and it's called the Syro-Ephraimitic War. Syro, S-Y-R-O dash Ephraimitic, E-P-H-R-A-I-M-I-T-I-C. E-P-H-R-A-I-M-I-T-I-C. And that means that 2 countries have gotten together, and they're trying to destroy Judah. And it's Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, the northern kingdom of Israel can be referred to as Ephraim. So it's a combined force of Syrians and the northern kingdom of Israel, and they start coming into the land. They've decided to do in Judah and Jerusalem. In fact, they've already assigned them from among themselves. They've already got a king worked up that they're going to put in on the throne. That's really going to work, you know. We've got the lineage of David, and they're going to stick a king in there. Well, that's not going to happen. And this will really be a problem during the reign of Ahaz, who is going to be that king of Judah. And Ahaz is the one who will refuse a sign from God in Isaiah 7. And that whole sign is concerned with the Syro-Ephraimitic War of 735 to 734. Now, if you go over here to Hosea 5, since we're right there, Hosea 5, look at beginning in verse 8. Here's some warfare. Blow the horn in Gibeah, the trumpet in Ramah, sound an alarm at Beth-aven. Behind you, Benjamin. Ephraim will become a desolation in the day of rebuke. This is a reference to that Syro-Ephraimitic war that's going to take place. Verse 9, Ephraim will become a desolation in the day of rebuke among the tribes of Israel. I declare what is sure. The princes of Judah have become like those who move a boundary. On them I will pour out my wrath like water. Moving a boundary is an old Oklahoma term for a Sooner. Called claim jumping. That's what you're looking at right here. This is claim jumping. And God doesn't look kindly on claim jumping. Moving boundaries, you see.
So God's not a fan of the Sooners, huh?
So He's not going to put up with that nonsense. That's right. So,
Dave, can you just clarify something? We're talking about the rise of the Assyrians. Is that right? The Assyrians?
The Assyrians are going to come in and try to take care of this problem. Ahaz is going to call on them to come in and try to take care of the problem. What we're looking at is the problem right here of Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel stirring things up.
Okay. All right.
And that's what's called the Syro-Ephraimitic War.
Okay.
When we get into Isaiah, I'll note it in more. I'm just introducing it to you right here. Verse 13 of Hosea 5 says, when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah his wound, then Ephraim went to Assyria and said to King Jareb, but he is unable to heal you or to cure you of your wound. So Ephraim, when they saw that they were not going to be successful, tried to make an alliance with the Assyrians. The Assyrians wouldn't have any part of that. They were already on the march, and they just come in and take the northern kingdom of Israel. They've already taken the kingdom of Syria with the city of Damascus, and then they decide they're going to move right from there right down into the southern kingdom of Judah, and that's when they get a hold of Hezekiah. Hezekiah of Jerusalem goes to God. God brings a sudden halt to that. 185,000 Assyrian soldiers die in one night, and that's the end of an Assyrian conquest of Judah. They've already taken Israel. And they take a bunch out of Judah also. They destroy a number of cities in Judah, and they take a number of captives. So that Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom of Israel also includes some Jews from Judah and some destroyed towns in the territory of Judah. But we'll wait till we get to that. But that just sort of gives you a little bit of preview of that. In fact, Sennacherib writes it in his annals as to the number of captives and the number of cities that he destroyed. So going back to Hosea, and we're just going to jump back into the outline. And we see beginning, let me see if there's anything else on the theme. Let me give you 3 points to the theme of the book. You got it. have something that I can ask you. Number one, the breadth and depth of God's love. That's under theme of the book. The breadth and depth of God's love. Number two, Israel's idolatry. They're guilty of adultery. They're unfaithful.
Is it
Israel's
adultery?
idolatry.
Oh, idolatry.
Yeah. And it's an adultery unfaithfulness problem. And number three, adultery is sin, both physical and spiritual. Adultery is sin, both physical and spiritual. And of course, you've noted spiritual adultery before when Jesus is talking about looking upon a woman to lust after her. But it's also noted very interestingly in the book of James, in James 4, in verse 4, when he says, "You adulteresses," he's talking to the brethren who are quarreling and fighting and committing murder. He says, "You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God?" And he uses the feminine form there in the Greek because it's the bride of Christ. So the bride of Christ is becoming an adulteress at this particular point. And that's when you make friends with the world, that means you're no longer a friend of God.
What do we call it, Dave? 3 points of what?
Pardon me?
3 points of what?
It's a theme.
3 points, we call it 3 points.
Oh, themes. The themes of the book. There's 3 points. Themes of the book. And then purpose of the book is 2 points for the purpose of the book. Number one, to reestablish the fellowship of life and love with the Lord. To reestablish the fellowship of life and love with the Lord.
Say that again, please.
To reestablish the fellowship of life and love with the Lord. And then the second purpose is to convince, and he's going to woo them as a lover, to convince a sinful and adulterous people, to convince, woo as a lover, a sinful and adulterous people to repent. To convince, woo as a lover, a sinful and adulterous people to repent because of the great and perpetual love of God. Because of the great and perpetual love of God.
Because of the great what?
Pardon me?
Because of the great what?
The great and perpetual love of God. Okay, we've got the outline right here. Now, in chapters 1 through 3, as you can note within the outline, you're going to see Hosea's marriage. And he's going to be told to go marry a certain woman. Now, there's 3 proposed interpretations of this section. There is the idea that the account is allegorical, that no such marriage ever took place, that the prophet invented the parable to illustrate the concept of God's love for sinful Israel. Well, I've got a terrible problem with that. Because he's using real people and real people's names. That pulls it out of the realm of being allegorical or a parable. And so, reason why I would refuse that particular interpretation is that the whole passage reads as a historical narrative. You have some of the same problems with Luke 16 when you talk about Lazarus and the rich man. The rich man is not going to be named, but Lazarus is. And so you're inclined to believe when real names are given that the text is talking about a real person. And if no such marriage actually took place, that would sort of reflect upon the prophet and his wife. Or it would reflect upon the prophet even if he was a bachelor. So that proposed interpretation I find to be very weak. The next two proposals are both that it is literal history. I mean, where else are you going to go? It's either going to be allegorical or it's going to be literal. So the next two are literal. Now, what we're doing now is we're breaking the literal down into two parts. Those who believe that the account is literal history, some believe that Hosea was commanded to marry an actual adulteress. And that he actually obeyed the divine command. Now the problem with that is that Hosea preaches strongly against immorality and infidelity. Would he then have participated or practiced in that which he condemned with his preaching? Doesn't seem likely. And that particular account, if you take it just as at face value, breaks down because it doesn't fit the symbolic parallel that we're going to see here in just a moment. There's a symbolic parallel between God as the husband and Israel as the wife versus Hosea as the husband and Gomer as the wife. So we've always got to keep that in mind. But the second interpretation is the one that I personally hold to, that the account is literal history. But there's a difference in Gomer, that Gomer was actually a clean woman at the beginning, and that after she becomes Hosea's wife, she then goes after other lovers. Now that'll fit the parallel.
This is the third one here?
This is the third one. The symbolic parallel is that Israel was faithful in the beginning, and then she went after other lovers. With Gomer and Hosea, it would be that Gomer was faithful in the beginning, and then went after other lovers. Thus, she became unfaithful. She's not unfaithful to begin with. Now, we're going to look at some of the terminology here, and we'll see how that will work out. Now, what it is if you look at verse 2, go take yourself a wife of harlotry. Now, a Jewish man under the law of Moses could marry a woman who had been given to harlotry. In fact, that's probably what we're looking at when we look at Rahab. That's not a problem. A priest could not. The law of Moses very specifically noted that a priest cannot do that. If she has ever been a harlot, no matter her present lifestyle, he cannot marry her. But a Jewish man can. But that really doesn't seem to be the case, because the phrase that is used right here is wife of harlotry. And the usual term for harlot is kedeshah. Q-E-D-H-E-S-H-A-H. Q-E-D-H-E-S-H-A-H. And that means one set apart. That's not the word that is used here in the Hebrew. The word that is used in Hebrews 1 and verse 2 is the Hebrew word zenumin. Z-E-N-U-M-I-N. Zenumin. And it's better translated a woman of harlotries. And the idea of that is a woman who is inclined toward harlotry. And so the term is used anticipatingly. In the grammar of the time, it's called proleptically. P-R-O-L-E-P-T-I-C-A-L-L-Y. Just means anticipatingly. So God is noting for Hosea that you're going to marry, he's commanding him to marry a woman who is inclined to be loose.
So do you think that God told him she's the one, or that she was just a loose moral woman, and he said, yes, she's probably the kind that he's talking about?
Well, God, of course, knows exactly what she's going to do. So he tells Hosea that she at this particular time will be faithful, but she's inclined to not be faithful. So she has a wandering mind and eyes.
So the zenumin, that's the one that's used here for harlotry?
That's the word that's used instead of the wife that is normally used for harlot. The term that is used for harlot is not used here.
Could you spell zenumin again?
Z-E-N-U-M-I-N.
Thank you.
So this fits. This fits with the proposed symbolism that we're going to note in Hosea, that Hosea's marriage experience was to be a symbol of God's experience. Israel began in faithfulness. She became a loose woman. Gomer began in faithfulness, but became a loose woman. Now, we'll note something interestingly in the text, and if you got your critical thinking cap on, you'll see it in the English. So I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to let you figure it out for yourself. And it backs up in the English translation what I'm saying right here. So when we're looking at verses 2 through 9, we're looking at the marriage. Verse 1 is the superscription. Let's take a look at the marriage. See if you see anything in here that would lead you to believe what I have proposed. When the Lord first spoke to Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry, have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. There's the symbolic parallel right there. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, Name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. Verse 5. And it will come about on that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So that's why you're going to name him Jezreel. Verse 6. Then she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter, and the Lord said to him, Name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I should ever forgive them, but I will have compassion on the house of Judah, and deliver them by the Lord their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. When she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said, Name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not, actually your God is not a good translation, I am not yours. Now, do you see anything in the birth of those three children that would lead you to believe that she was faithful at the first and then unfaithful later on? I've sort of given you a big clue right there.
But it says that, as far as the first son goes, it says that she bore him a son. And then in verse 6, it just says she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And then in verse 8, she conceived and gave birth to a son. But it doesn't say to him, which that indicates that those two children.
That may well, we don't know for sure, but that may well indicate in the English that she's faithful in the birth of the first child, but she's loose with the second and third.
Well, I mean, the name alone, not my child, says that right there, not my child.
Okay.
I mean, that's the biggest indicator of it all. It says, I mean, that's, the name bears the secret, I guess.
Uh-huh.
What do you think?
Oh, I go along with the fact that he starts out by saying bore him a son, and then from that point he doesn't say that. So, and of course I'm inclined to go in that direction because of the use of the Hebrew with the wife of harlotry. But no, that all seems to be evident. At least it is to me. So we've got three children right here. And the three children, the first one is Jezreel, and that's a son. And Jezreel stands for God will scatter. Lo-Ruhamah is no mercy. And then Lo-Ami is not my people. Now, the not and the no are seen there with Lo-Ruhamah and Lo-Ami. The negative is there in the lo of both of those words. And so we've got three children, and the three children right here, and you can see in your outline, Jezreel is scattering, Lo-Ruhamah is no mercy, Lo-Ami is not my people or not mine. When the actual word is used, I am not yours. So that idea, not my people. But then he's going to gather them. Now that's what he's going to do, is he scatters them. As he scatters them, they're going to be scattered with no mercy because they're not his people. But then he's going to talk about gathering them. And when he does, he changes the name. Jezreel remains the same because Jezreel because of the term scattering, that also carries with the idea of sowing. So if you're looking in the very concrete terminology of the Hebrew language, you're looking at a scattering of the seed, which can also be functional or dysfunctional. A scattering of the people would be very dysfunctional. A scattering of the seed would be very functional. And so as they're being gathered, it is sowing unto God. So the name Jezreel can either mean scattered or sowing unto God. But it all has a very concrete thought in the one who broadcast. Remember what broadcasting is all about. Broadcasting is casting the seed in a broad pattern. And they never would go down until they got the plow all arranged. They never did go down furrows and plant seeds in a straight line. It would be, you'd go into some land that looked like it was fertile, then you just take the seed and you would, with a broadcast, you just spread it over the ground, and hopefully some of it would survive. Some of it would fall into the weeds, some of it would fall into the thorns, some of it would fall upon rocky ground, some of it would be burned up, and you remember Jesus talking about that, and that's the very figure of broadcasting seed. But here we have sowing unto God, and then you'll note that when he gathers, lo, Ruhama is going to be changed to Ruhama, so the negative is taken off. So would be no mercy, but now it is mercy. And then lo ami, which would be not my people, would be my people. So we're going to see that in verse 10, beginning in verse 10, going through chapter 2, verse 1. So he's going to continue to use the names of these three children. So as you think of the parallel, if you're looking at the symbolic parallel, here's God. He has brought forth in this relationship a marriage. He's the husband. She's the wife. If you turn over here to, let's see what I want. Turn over here to, turn over here to Ezekiel 16. And look at, this is in reference to Judah and Jerusalem. This is a later prophecy. In Ezekiel 16, God is working with Jerusalem and Judah to get them straightened around. It says in verse 1 of Ezekiel 16, then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, make known to Jerusalem her abominations, and say, thus the Lord, says the Lord God, Jerusalem, your origin and your birth are from the land of the Canaanite. Your father was an Amorite, and your mother a Hittite. Well, those are both idolatrous people. And what he's saying is, because of the way you're acting right now, it looks to me like you were born of a Canaanite who was an Amorite, and you were also born of a Hittite. You're idolatrous. Verse 4, as for your birth on the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut. This is going to be an abandoned female baby. Nor were you washed with water for cleansing. You were not rubbed with salt or even wrapped in cloths. There gives you some of the cultural tradition in the care of babies. No, to do
any of these things, for you to have compassion on you, rather you were thrown out into the open field, for you were abhorred on the day you were born. Not very good parents. Not an untypical, in many ways, ancient way of dealing with girl babies when you want sons. If you're living in an agricultural society, or even in a nomadic society, you've got to have strong workers. And if those strong workers only come from within your family because you're involved in subsistence farming, then girls are rather useless. Well, they can be traded off later on for maybe a son-in-law who might come and work for you. But really, you want sons. Now, Jewish families were not this way. This was never a practice among Jewish families. But there were peoples in the land who did that.
even way up into the time of the Greeks. And so getting rid of the female. So idolatry is the problem right here. And this is what idolatry brings you to, in being worldly. But God, verse 6 says, when I passed by you and saw you squirming in your blood, I said to you while you were in your blood, live. I said to you while you were in your blood, live. I made you numerous like plants of the field. Then you grew up, became tall, reached the age for fine ornaments. Your breasts were formed. Your hair had grown, yet you were naked and bare. Then I passed by you and saw you, and behold, you were at the time for love. So I spread my skirt over you and covered your nakedness. I also swore to you, entered into a covenant with you. The covenant is the husband-wife covenant relationship. You can cross-reference Exodus 19, verses 5 through 8 for that particular point right there. Entered into a covenant with you, so you became mine. That's the marriage covenant relationship. And we understand that within the Christian covenant relationship of marriage, she becomes mine and I become hers. We become one flesh. Entered into a covenant. Verse 9, that I bathed you with water, washed off your blood from you, and anointed you with oil. I also clothed you with embroidered cloth, put sandals of porpoise skin on your feet. And I wrapped you with fine linen and covered you with silk. And I adorned you with ornaments, put bracelets on your hands and a necklace around your neck. I also put a ring in your nostril. That's a very proper thing to do for one who is loved of the feminine form. Not culturally necessary today, but that was a part of it. And you didn't get to put the ring in your nose. She put it in herself. And it's not here. It's here, just like kids wear them today. And so put a ring in your nostril, earrings on your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. Thus you were adorned with gold and silver, and your dress was of fine linen, silk, and embroidered cloth. You ate fine flour, honey, and oil, so you were exceedingly beautiful and advanced to royalty. Then your fame went forth among the nations on account of your beauty, for it was perfect because of my splendor, which I bestowed on you, declares the Lord God. But you trusted in your beauty and played the harlot because of your fame, and you poured out your harlotries on every passerby who might be willing. You took some of your clothes, made for yourself high places of various colors, played the harlot on them, which should never come about nor happen. You also took your beautiful jewels made of my gold and of my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourself male images that you might play the harlot with them. Then you took your embroidered cloth and covered them, and offered my oil and my incense before them, also my bread, which I gave you, fine flour, oil, and honey, with which I fed you, you would offer before them for a soothing aroma. So it happened, declares the Lord God. Moreover, you took your sons and daughters whom you had borne to me, and you sacrificed them to idols to be devoured. Were your harlotries so small a matter? And he goes on and on. And that fits in very well with this symbolic relationship between God and Israel. There he's noting it between himself and Judah and Jerusalem, but same kind of thought, that he's the one that gave her everything, and everything that he gave her was his, and then she misused it. And she's more than just a common prostitute, because a prostitute receives money from those that she lays with. In this particular case, she was paying them to lay with her, or to lie with her. So it's very disgusting to God, and it's very disgusting right here as he's dealing with the northern kingdom of Israel in some of this last return to me terminology. And so that fits in quite well with what we're looking at as we go back to Hosea. So when we're looking at Hosea 1 verse 10 through chapter 2 verse 1, we see that there is a restoration in order. He says, yet the number of the sons of Israel, this is chapter 1 verse 10, will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it will come about that in the place where it is said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. So, when they return from, and this will be all the way down to Babylonian, Assyrian, Babylonian captivity, when they return in 536, now remember this is being written somewhere around 750, 725. So this is not going to take place until 536. But there'll be a time when you will be my people once again. But until that time, your idolatrous ways, which is seen in a spiritual adultery, is going to get you a long, long, long woodshed moment. So there'll be a time coming. Verse 11, and the sons of Judah, the sons of Israel will be gathered together. There we go again. Lost tribes of Israel? No. Here he's talking about them coming back together again. We're going to see that also in the book of Ezekiel. They will appoint for themselves one leader. That's very Messiah. They will go up from the land, just like they came out of Egypt. They will come out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. So Jezreel takes on now the sowing unto God. Jezreel took on the meaning of scattered before, but now it is sowing unto God. So no more the stigma of being dispersed. Now they will be coming back sowing. So in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, say to your brothers, Ami, my people, and your sisters, Ruhamah, mercy. Contend with your mother. Well, you just stay right there at verse 1. So God's compassion is noted very early on in the outline of Hosea. He comes down hard on them. He notes what the meaning of the children's names will be. It's a sort of a show and tell for Hosea to note to the people all the time that he's prophesying. But these people that he's prophesying to will never get to see a return back into the land. They're on a slippery slope and they're going in the wrong direction. Now this is always an opportunity for individuals to repent and get right with the Lord. But really it's spelling the doom of the nation. You've been going in the wrong direction for some time. With Jeroboam II having died, and there's only 5 kings left. He doesn't tell them that, but we know that. Anarchy's going to reign. Everybody's going to be killing everybody off. And the Assyrians are going to come into the land, take you off into Assyrian captivity. You're not going to like it one little bit. And then eventually you'll come back into the land.
A question about the idea of the nation being punished and an individual's repentance. So we have this nation here, they're going to be punished for their overall sinful behavior.
Yep.
So what about maybe the individuals who kind of heed Hosea's warning? I know we don't have any real evidence of individuals repenting, but...
Well, we do have every once in a while. Remember, these individuals who get in the way, or they talk, they say something to the prophet, and the prophet gives them, that's it, you know, you're going to die as a result of that. Now, he doesn't necessarily say your soul's going to be lost forever, but there's a punishment that comes right there at that particular time. So we see a little bit of individual, but we don't see any idea of an individual being out of sorts with God for eternity.
So case. God being the just God, he'll reward those who repent.
That's right.
And punish those who don't.
Yeah. And those who repent will always be the foundation of a remnant. In other words, there will always be a remnant in the land of captivity. So anytime we talk about remnant, the remnant is a result of those who have remained faithful. Okay. So we come down to chapter 2, verse 2, and go down through verse 23, and we have punishment, conversion, and final restoration of unfaithful Israel. So he's gone from the names and what's going to happen and how those names are going to be used. He's given a little bit of his compassion. Now he's going to roll over from the compassion, get right back to the punishment side. Here in chapter 2, beginning with verse 2 and going through verse 23. And it says, contend, and this is the punishment, verses 2 through 13. We're going to see the punishment side right here. It says, contend with your mother. Now he's talking to Ami and Ruhamah. Well, the mother is Israel. The mother is Gomer. And here, many times, the children can, turn back the mother. Here's God. Here's the husband pleading for the wife to return. And here's the children. You have an effect on your mother. And so this is what you need to be doing. So here's an individual responsibility on the part of the righteous who are found in the northern kingdom of Israel. Now remember, Elijah said, no more righteous people up there. And God says, oh, wait a minute. There's 7,000 up there who've not bowed the knee to Baal. So don't give me that. So here would be those individuals who are righteous, and they are to contend with their mother, along with the husband who is contending with his wife to get her to return. So contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband. She's going in the wrong direction. Let her put her harlotry from her face. The face is always a mirror of modesty or immodesty. And we see it especially within the Jewish culture where cosmetics are known, and an overuse of cosmetics will leave the woman looking like a Jezebel, or just a little use of cosmetics will leave her looking very pleasant. And cosmetics would include things like olive oil and perfumed olive oil and the softening of the skin, but also eye makeup is very much a part of ancient peoples. And Canaanite women were into eye makeup, and we see that by a number of archaeological digs where we find statuary and we find also pottery painting. But you'll probably note in all of the Egyptian archaeological digs, there's a lot of eye makeup that's used by Egyptian women to accentuate the sensuousness of their eyes. Also, it's interesting, anytime you see Egyptian pharaohs and you see his wife, both of them have beards. Now, they're a clean-shaven people, so they didn't have natural beards, but if you look at it real closely, you can see the little wire that comes up and loops up around the ears. And there's one for the pharaoh, and there's one for his wife. And that was just a sign among the pharaohs that they were gods on earth or some nonsense like that. But cosmetics are very well known. Somebody had a hand raised.
Historically speaking, when, if ever, did Israelite women start wearing burqas?
We've got Rachel.
Okay.
Rachel's wearing a head covering.
Okay.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that?
So that she cannot be seen.
So
no, she's probably wearing a head covering all the way on her head, all the way down across her face.
Okay.
The veil. Yeah. So she would not be seen. No problem for her to be seen by the servant, but to be seen by the one who's going to become her husband is the problem right there. So it goes way back.
Was that
Now that, of course, is pre-Jewish period.
Okay.
with Rachel.
So was that common among Israelite women?
It was not necessarily something that's done every day. There are women in the marketplace who are unveiled. It's not as common as it is with Orthodox Muslim women today.
So it wasn't a requirement?
No.
Okay.
No. But they took it upon themselves to maintain a servant attitude. They would generally walk behind their husbands. There'd be no natural displays of affection in public, no holding of hands, nothing like that. And that doesn't mean that culturally, that's just a cultural situation that they would have grown to be a part of. There's nothing within Scripture that would note that. Now, it goes on to say that this woman has really gone to an extreme in trying to allure. See, let her put her harlotry away from her face, and so her face is reflecting an immodest face. But then the next line says, let her her adultery from between her breasts. And so there were women who were harlots who would expose their breasts with the idea of allurement. And so that would not be an unusual thing and prostitution was seen within Judaism, harlotry. He says, lest I strip her naked. Now, the harlot would expose different parts of her body, but she would be the one who would be doing that. But then to take a harlot and strip her naked would be completely exposed, and she would be like a slave. A slave is one who is completely exposed. A slave who stands on the auction block. There's no covering for the slave. So let her, and her adultery from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked, she would not want that, and expose her as on the day she was born. I will also make her like a wilderness, make her like a desert land. In other words, she's not going to have any contact. She's going to be removed from society. She's not going to have any communication with anybody. And slay her with thirst. Also, I have no compassion on her children. This is talking about the harlot. He's talking about the nation primarily right here. He's not talking about Gomer in this particular case. I have no compassion on her children. And so this is not just in the area of religious, but it's also in the area of civil, because they are children of harlotry. And so they have been born out of a harlotry situation, for their mother has played the harlot. Now, we understand that children in a case that are born out of harlotry are innocent victims. God would consider them to be innocent victims. But that doesn't mean that they stand in the presence of society as innocent. So back at this time, if you were born as a child of harlotry, you were sort of a pariah. You were sort of a downcast individual. We saw that in the book of Judges, you remember, when we were looking at, was it Jephthah was the one who was born of a harlot. He was then misused by his own brethren. What were you going to say, Mark?
Well, I was just going to point out, he's talking to the two children that it seems are illegitimate, right?
Yeah.
And so there's almost a sense of
So the children that are illegitimate are those children that would have an influence upon their mother. So that would be not necessarily just Gomer, although it's easy to get this mixed in there. It's not necessarily Gomer, but he's talking to those who can sway the mother to get back with God. In other words, you need to go back to your husband. You need to go back to our Father, is the idea. So she said, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water, my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. Now, hedging up the way with thorns is an agricultural term. These people use brush for barbed wire. They would find thorn bushes, transplant thorn bushes. In New Zealand, we had a thorn bush. It's called gorse. It has a needle on it that's probably about 2 to 3 inches long.
Sounds like hackberry.
Pardon me?
Sounds like hackberry tree back home.
And we have a member of the church, I don't think he's alive anymore, but a member of the church who was a farmer, and he got stuck in one of his eyes with the gorse in it, and he went blind in that eye. But in Europe, gorse is used for natural hedgerow. It's called hedgerow. It's called hedgerow in France, in the Bocage country. In fact, the Allies, when they invaded France in Normandy, first thing they did was run into the Bocage country, and they found out that the Germans had defended each of those fields because the hedgerow was built up, and it's built up in an earthen bank, and then it's got the vegetation on top of it. And this is what they use for natural fencing. And so every field that they get into would be set up with crossfire, machine gun crossfire, and they really hated the hedgerow country until they figured out how to put some army engineer on the spot decided I can weld something onto the Sherman tank, which will look like steel teeth, and he took some of the old steel that they'd found in the beach obstacles and started welding that on, and then they'd drive that Sherman tank right into the hedgerow, and they take about 1 or 2 passes and they blow right through the hedgerow, and that took care of that particular problem. But using thorn bushes is just an old way of making fencing. When you're out on the plains, you don't have thorn bushes, and so you have to come up with barbed wire. And but this is ancient barbed wire, and so what he says in verse 6, therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. This is just he says, I'm going to enclose her within this wilderness. She's going to be like a wilderness, like a desert land back here in verse 3. And I'm going to keep her contained. And so the containment is what she will undergo in captivity. She's headed towards captivity. Therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. I will build a wall against her. See, this is just some more synonymous parallelism right here. I will build a wall against her so she cannot find her paths. Her paths are to idol worship. So he says, I'm going to build up a hedge around her that she'll be separated from her lovers. Her lovers would be idolatry. She'll be separated from her lovers. She won't be able to get to them. She'll not be able to find her paths. Verse 7, and she will pursue her lovers. That's idolatry. But she will not overtake them. She will seek them, but will not find them. Then she will say, I will go back to my first husband, for it was better for me than now. So here's repentance as a result of discipline. And what he's noting is something that we already know about because we can look back on it. But what he's promising them is that as a woman who is an adulteress, she's going to go off into captivity. She's going to have a hedge built around her, a very thorny hedge, one that she cannot get through, and her pursuit of her lovers will come to an end. Now, when they go off into Babylonian captivity, Israel will go off into Assyrian captivity. Judah will go off into Babylonian captivity. They will meet in captivity because the Babylonians take over the Assyrians. So that which was Assyria becomes Babylonian. Therefore, the Jews who are there reunite with the Jews who were taken off by the Babylonians. And for 70 years, under the Babylonians, they'll be in captivity. And they went into captivity as a result of idolatry. When they come out of captivity, idolatry is no longer a problem. So that's what you're looking at right here. Easy for us to see, a little bit more difficult for the Jews to see. they would have to accept it on the basis of, well, that's what God said, that's what's going to happen. But we see that it really did happen. So that takes you down to verse 7, verse 8, for she does not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the new wine, and the oil. Now you remember, we were looking at Amos, and when we were looking at Amos, go back to Amos 7. Amos 7, beginning with verse 10. Amos 7, verse 10, Amaziah is the one who says Amos is conspiring against us. Tell him to go back and eat bread back home. And Amos is saying, no, I'm prophesying against Israel. I'm prophesying against Judah. And so he is noted, like others will note, that God disciplines them while they're still in the land by the removal of food items. And you remember that they're not able to worship God because they don't have the means to worship God, because he's taken away as a result of famine all that they might worship God with, the grain offering and the libation, remember? So this is what he's going to do. She does not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the new wine, and the oil, and lavished on her the silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Therefore I will take, remember Jezebel is the one that introduced Baal worship in the northern kingdom of Israel? Therefore I will take back my grain at harvest time. Now what he means is, they plant and it grows, but the yield is terrible. Well, who made the yield terrible? God. Normal bounty, but not much here. And my new wine in its season, just won't give it to him. I'll take away my wool and my flax, take it away from him, given to cover her nakedness, so she'll truly be exposed. And then I will uncover her lewdness, that's her wickedness, will be seen by all. I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one will rescue her out of my hand. I will also put an end to all her gaiety, her feasts, her new moons, and her Sabbaths. Remember, that was an outward sham. God said that's vain worship. Quit doing that. All her festival assemblies. I will destroy her vines and fig trees, of which she said, these are my wages. God doesn't even get the credit. What she says is, I planted it, I watered it, it grew, it's mine. Well, wait a minute, where did the seed come from? Where did the ground come from? Where did the rain come from? And she won't even say that God did this for me. Of which she said, these are my wages, which my lovers have given me. So what she's saying is, idolatry gave me this bounty. These lovers gave me this bounty. So God is completely left out of the picture. He does not like that, by the way. I think you've got that figured out already. And I will make them a forest. Now, how do you make the vines and the fig trees a forest?
Say that again?
Yeah. What happens when you clear? What happens when you clear in a tropical setting? When you make a clearing out of the jungle, what will happen if you don't keep it clear?
Comes back like crazy. Comes back like crazy.
Comes right back. Yeah.
But in Tennessee, that's what happens.
It's a jungle all over again. See, so you got to keep it clear. And so what he's saying right here, he says, since you give credit to these vines and fig trees to your idols, well, I'm going to make them a forest. In other words, I'm going to make sure they're overgrown, that you won't be able to use them anymore. And the beasts of the field will devour them because they're unattended. You know, the cows got in the corn. Well, How'd the cows get in the court? Well, they're unattended. And so there they are, eating your crop. And so he says, this is what I'm going to do to them. Well, when will all this be done? Well, when they leave the land, when they go off into Assyrian captivity, we're going to see later on that the land becomes unproductive. The Assyrians want it to be productive. In fact, the lions start coming out and going after the people. And the people will cry out to the Assyrians, you got to do something about this. And what the Assyrians will do, interestingly enough, will find some of those who are the real priests of God and will send them back into the land that they might pray to God that the land be spared. Because if it's unproductive for those who are left in the land, it'll be unproductive for the Assyrians. The reason they left people in the land, sent some of their own people into the land, is because they wanted the land to be productive. No sense in going in and conquering a land and then the land is no longer productive. So we want some of that good stuff. But it's not going to happen. It's going to be unattended. Beasts of the field will devour them. And I will punish her for the days of the Baals, when she used to offer sacrifices to them and adorn herself with her earrings and jewelry and follow her lovers, so that she forgot me, declares the Lord. And so this is what's going to happen to the northern kingdom of Israel, because she forgot me. She went after her lovers. Now, in case you're thinking that, well, there's not much application there, instead of lovers, instead of idolatry, insert materialism. And see if it has any application for us today. When we go after the material things of life, when we go after the good life that we have described it as such, when we go after the newness of life, I've got to have this new item and that new item, and I've got to have this beautiful item, that beautiful item. And when we go after that, it becomes, and if it becomes our God, then it becomes idolatry. And if it becomes idolatry, that means that we have forgotten God and we have placed something in our vision that lies between ourself and God. It can be material wealth. It can even be self. We can be self-centered, and in being self-centered, we become the idol. Narcissism is an idolatry. Does everybody know what narcissism is? That's when I look in the mirror and I say, I'm the most wonderful, beautiful, precious individual in the universe, and I'm really the center of the universe. That's narcissism. And are there people like that are around?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's the ultimate in selfishness. The world revolves around me. I'm the sun of the universe, S-U-N. I'm the sun of the universe. That's a form of idolatry. And it's very easy to become that way, especially when people will tell you, "Ooh, what a wonderful preacher you are. Ooh, what a great teacher. Ooh." And then after a while you start believing it. "Oh, you're so good looking. Oh, you're blah, 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 blah." Terrible. Preachers. Yeah.
Narcissist consultant. D-O-N-N. I'll look it up.
He's not narcissistic.
I'm just kidding.
M-A-R-C. I-S-S. T-I-C. Close, may not be it. Narcissistic. Narcissus was an individual in Greek mythology who stood in front of a his reflection and just fell in love with himself. That's where narcissism comes from.
Do you suppose that because we as a country have been, we've just been blessed in this country for so many years, and we've been such a strong world power for so many years, and in the short history of our country, we've accomplished so much. Do you suppose that has helped bring about the kind of health and wealth theology that's so popular right now? I just keep thinking of Victoria Osteen saying that everything, what makes God happy is when we make ourselves happy.
No. That's terrible. But he's preaching a message that tickles the ears.
Yeah.
And that's why he's popular. So you want to be popular, you go out and tickle ears. Not noses. Not look at DeAndre when you say that. If he's got a nose that is of any distinction, it is a classic.
Thank you.
Classic.
As God's, chosen people.
Narcissist.
I can be proud of being God's child.
So, going on to verse 14 of chapter 2 is God's reacceptance of Israel. It's not noted in that outline that you have there, but verses 14 through 23, this is what she has done to herself, coming down through verse 13. She has done this to herself. And he's focusing on the nation. He's not focusing on the Gomer-Hosea relationship. He's going to come back to that in just a moment. But in verses 14 through 23, here is what I have planned for her. He's already told about the punishment, the discipline, the woodshed, all of that. That's already been noted. And it's been noted because she's doing this. She's going in the wrong direction. And this will, by the way, continue to be a problem all the way down until they finally go off into Babylonian captivity, this idolatry. God will constantly preach against idolatry. But in verses 14 through 23, he says, therefore, behold, I will allure her. Now, to allure her is to woo as a lover. And you all were involved in that, those of you who were married during the honeymoon period. And then after the honeymoon was over, you all went to pot.
All right.
You start taking each other for granted.
Already headed there.
No, I'm not saying that that's what you did. I'm saying that happens lots of times.
My question is, where are you talking like this?
No, I'm talking about my marriage. When you act differently when you were in the engaged stage, and then after you got married, everything is different. But here's God wooing as a lover. I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak kindly to her. See, I can get her attention. I'm going to bring her someplace where I can get her attention. Now, that will be Babylonian captivity and Assyrian captivity. And it's like that area between Egypt and the Promised Land. Between Egypt and the Promised Land, when they weren't ready, they had lacked the faith to go into the Promised Land. When the 12 spies came back and only 2 gave a good report, then God says, you're not going in. Then they tried to go in. He said, well, it's not going to work. You're going to wander out here. You're going to be a captive audience. And I will speak kindly to you while you're here. And during this time that you're here, you're going to lose the slave mentality. That's why you wouldn't go into the land. You had a slave mentality. That's what you were in Egypt. Now you're going to gain in the wilderness, through the difficulties of the wilderness, you're going to gain a warrior appearance. period. So you're going to go from slave mentality to warrior mentality, and then by the time those old warriors are all gone, new crowd will come along. Now you'll be ready to go into the land. But you'll be a captive audience while I'm doing it. That's what he's talking about right here. I will allure her, bring her into the wilderness, and speak kindly to her. She will be a captive audience. Then I will give her vineyards from there. So from that point, I'll be preparing everything for her to come back. And the valley of Achor as a door of hope. Well, Achor was the area of the stoning of Achan, and that was that punishment back in Joshua 7, verses 25 and 26. But here, that which was a stoning of Achan will be a door of hope. And so it won't be anything like when they came into the promised land before. And she will sing there as in the days of her youth, as in the days when she came up from the land of Egypt. So there was a time when they were right before God. And it will come about in that day, declares the Lord, that you will call me Ishi. Ishi means my husband. So when you come back into the land, things are going to be different. Right now, you're just a harlot that I'm trying to deal with. But there's a day coming that you're going to come back. You're going to say, my husband, and will no longer call me Baali. In other words, where God is seen as another Baal. You'll no longer call me a Baali. For I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, so that they will be mentioned by their names no more. That's going to be the end of idolatry. And 70 years for those of Judah, and 100 and, how many years would it be? 135 years more for the northern kingdom of Israel? Something like that. I don't remember the exact mathematical. They go off in 721, 722. And Judah starts going off in 606. So the difference in that time frame. In that day I will also make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field. Now what's he going to do with the beasts of the field? Well, go back here to verse 12. What did verse 12 say? The beasts of the field will devour them. So the beasts of the field that were once domesticated become wild. Now, when they come back into the land, the wild beasts will once again be domesticated. That day I'll also make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, the creeping things of the ground. I will abolish the bow. What does that mean?
No more war.
No more war. The sword and war from the land. And I will make them lie down in safety. That's peace terminology. Lying with the lamb. That's peace terminology. And I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in loving kindness and in compassion. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, then you will know the Lord. This is a reestablishment of the husband-wife relationship when they come back into the land. And it's true. You know, we can get all over the Pharisees, and rightly so, for their legalism. And legalism in and of itself is not wrong. We want to be legal. Wouldn't you rather be legal than illegal? Yeah. So you are legalistic in a certain way, but this is a legalism that goes beyond the law, where you would make law where there is no law. And so the Pharisees are taking the task for that, but they have gone to an extreme because they're trying to get rid of idolatry. And so in getting rid of idolatry, they went to a legalism that was extreme.
Can I give an example?
Yeah.
Because I saw this in law enforcement when I first started. Domestic violence was ignored. I mean, to the point where women would have broken arms and officers would walk away and not do anything. And it became shortly after I started working in police work, it became very quickly that it went to the other extreme. If someone even said they were abused without any evidence, then they went to jail for it.
Yeah.
So you went from one extreme to the other extreme.
And we don't find that area in between. You know, yeah. And as human beings, we just do it all the time. Now the NFL thing is probably going to swing to an extreme here. And it's going to bring to light more domestic abuse, and we'll probably see an extreme in all of that. And there already is an extreme concerning the molesting of children. How many, and I don't think it's a great number, but there are a number of teachers who have been accused when the accusation was wrong, and they lost their job, but then regained their job, but lost their reputation, and never really could regain their job.
Those people
All on the basis of some children who were pampered, spoiled children, and decided they make it rough for a teacher because the teacher gave them so much homework, you know, and so the girls got together and said, well, he molested us, and without much evidence sometimes. Now they're trying to clamp down on that and understand all of that. There are kids who will do things like that. Anyway, we go to extremes, don't we? And so going from idolatry, we find the Jews went to another extreme, which is found in legalism. But he says, you're going to be, says, then you will know the Lord. And that was what they were attempting to do, even among the Pharisees. Verse 21, it will come about that day that I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the heavens, and they will respond to the earth, and the earth will respond to the grain. Now, what it means when he says heavens and earth, we're talking about rain. So he withholds the rain as a matter of discipline. Discipline time is over. Woodshed moment is complete. And so now there's rain, there's prosperity. The earth will respond to the grain, to the new wine, to the oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. What does Jezreel mean? Scattering, sowing. So now Jezreel has a different emphasis. Before it was the scattering of the people into captivity. Now it is a gathering and sowing of the people coming back into the land. And I will sow her for myself. That's a play on the term Jezreel. Jezreel means sowing, and he says, I will sow her for myself. In other words, I'm going to take a hand in their restoration. Restoration back into the land, restoration of the land. I will also have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion, and I will say to those who were not my people, see? Now, when he says, I will have compassion, that goes back to Lo Ruhama. Because Lo Ruhama meant no mercy, no compassion. Mercy and compassion being one and the same right here. So I will have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. So her name is changed from Lo Ruhama to Ruhama. And I will say to those people who were not my people, that's Lo Ami. You are my people, Ami. And they will say, thou art my God. So he's given us a preview of what's going to happen. Well, he's given the people a preview of what's going to happen through Hosea. Meanwhile, Hosea has married this woman who has a wandering eye, and she's gone after her lovers. And God is going to note for Hosea in chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, go get her. Then the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman. And there's no reason to believe this is anybody other than Gomer. Love a woman who is loved by her husband yet an adulteress. Well, with God, God never stopped loving. And that's a passage that we look at many times, and we think about the fact that God loves us. In Romans 8, in verse 38 and 39, it says, "For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus." There is nothing that can separate you from the love of God. Even you. Sometimes preachers say, "Oh yeah, but you can separate." No, you can't separate yourself from the love of God. Love of God is still there. Now you've decided to walk away from the love of God, but the love of God is still there. There's nothing that can separate you from the love of God. And so we're the one that goes in the wrong. We're the one who will go in the wrong direction. It's not God. God continues to be going in the right direction. We're supposed to grab a hold of Him and hang on, cling to Him, because He's going in the right direction. And right there, that embodies the love of God. Now, if you decide to let go, or something catches your attention and you let go, something gets in the way and you let go, God continues to go in the right direction, but now our direction has changed. And so somewhere along the line, like the prodigal, we need to determine, I'm in the wrong place. I'm going in the wrong direction. I better go back. I'd be better off as a servant in my Father's house. And so then one repents, and one goes back. Now here's the nation. The nation has repented. God is bringing them back. And that's what's being noted right here in chapter 2. But in chapter 3, he's saying the nation is still loved. Getting back to the present. He's gone past this time of future. The future is right here in verses 14 through 23. Now let's get back to the present. So here he says to Hosea, "Go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband, yet an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the son of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes." Raisin cakes are just cakes of raisins, pressed blocks of raisins, something that was used by individuals when they'd be traveling. All you have to do is just have a pressed cake of raisins, maybe wrapped in something in a bag, and if you're hungry, you can just cut a piece off. It's dried raisins. You can, through the moisture of your mouth, eat it, or you can take some water and put it into something that you can cook it in, and it regains its moisture. It's just like dried. They did it with figs. They did it with raisins, and they're called cakes of figs or cakes of raisins. And they used them, sadly, in offering to their idol gods. So they thought that the god needed food, and so they'd give him a raisin cake. So though they turned to other gods and loved raisin cakes, so I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Now, someone said one night in a lesson that we were listening to over at the Lakewood building, one of the guys, he said, "That's the price of a dead slave." Wait a minute. A dead slave doesn't bring anything. I mean, why would you buy a dead slave? You know? I don't know if anybody went up and noted to him. He meant a wounded slave. He didn't mean a dead slave. But right here, 15 shekels of silver 15 shekels of silver, 30 shekels of silver is the price of a good slave. What we're looking at right here would not be the price of a good slave, but this is the price of a slave that is like one that has been wounded, or one that is not worth, one that is not in good health. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver. The shekel is silver by weight. In other words, just a chunk of silver. You'd find a vein of silver, and they would dig out that vein of silver and then break that silver up into different weights. And I have an archaeological photograph of a jar that has been put together. A terracotta jar was full of broken pieces of silver, and that was a treasure to someone. Someone had it somewhere, and it was hidden away. So you take these little chunks of silver and weigh them out, and for 15 shekels, that's the weight of silver, and a homer and a half of barley, that is a seah in the Hebrew is about 1.5 gallons dry weight, and a homer and a half would be 45 of those. So 1.5 times 45 as far as barley is concerned. Barley is, of course, the cheap grain food. Wheat is the more expensive one. Then I said to her, "You shall stay with me for many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man, so I will also be toward you." So what he's saying is, really, you're going to be with me. I'm going to buy you back. You're going to be with me. And probably what we're looking at right here, because of what we're going to look at in verse 4 in just a moment, would be, and here I have it written down, 116 years of Assyrian captivity plus 70 years of Babylonian captivity. 116 years of Assyrian captivity, 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Because he says in verse 4, and this is Babylonian captivity terminology, "For the sons of Israel will remain for many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, and without ephod or household gods." In other words, everything that would be of a religious nature, both in a right situation or a wrong situation, they're going to be separated from, because the temple is going to be destroyed. If you're an Israelite, you're going to be taken off into Assyrian captivity, you don't have any access to the temple. If you're in Babylonian captivity, no access to the temple.
Why is it, you don't think that he's talking about both Gomer and her children and Israel? Because it seems like he's going back and forth.
Right here within the section, he's noting what Hosea is going to have, what relationship he's got. There's no conjugal relationship right here. That's been cut off.
Right, but I mean like chapter 1, because it seems like that Hosea, that whole chapter 1 is talking about exactly what Gomer did to Hosea, and then he cast her off, and now he's bringing her back, so it seems to correlate.
That's right, and she's been cast off. There's no indication of divorce. The casting off is that she's gone her own self-willed way and become a prostitute.
Chased after her lovers.
And she ends up on the slave block.
Right.
So that's slave block terminology. So he says to Hosea, you go buy her back off the slave block. You'll buy her back as a used individual. And as a used individual, you need to tell her that there's not going to be any more of a conjugal relationship, but she's going to be held in a position of discipline. And this discipline is that she will be his wife once again, but the discipline is the lack of conjugal relationship and captivity. And then the captivity relates directly to that captivity of both Israel and Judah.
That'd be
And
kind of
also Henry.
You what?
Wouldn't that be kind of a punishment for him too?
Well, perhaps not.
Not if she's only worth 15 shekels.
Perhaps he's of the age that conjugal relationships don't matter anymore. And for you young guys, you think that will probably never happen, but it may. That's a part of God's process. So, remain for many days without king or prince. Verse 5, afterward, here we have restoration. Afterward, the sons of Israel will return and seek the Lord their God. That's restoration from captivity. And David their king, that, of course, is messianic. That's the Davidic line. They are seeking after David their king. They know that David is, but they're looking for a king. That's bound up in the Messiah. And they will come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness in the last days. The last days doesn't always mean the end of the world. It just means the last days of a particular age. Now, when we're over, you remember when we were in Joel, the 2nd chapter, and then we were comparing it to Acts, the 2nd chapter. And in Acts, the 2nd chapter, we were reading that was provided by Peter in Acts 2, verse 17. And it shall be in the last days. So here we have last days terminology. So we have last days at the end of that time of the restoration, but that restoration moves directly into the Messianic age. And this is one of those, and I'll talk more about it later on, this is one of those circles of time. The Jewish mind did not think in linear time. Linear time is unknown to the Jewish mind. We think in linear time. When you stretch out time, it's in a straight line, isn't it? And you've got eternity and eternity, all in a straight line. But in the Jewish line of thought, there are circles of time. And this is one of those circles of time. This circle of time is going to be ending when we come down to Pentecost. When we come down to Acts, the 2nd chapter, that's the end of a circle of time. And now we are in a new circle of time in Jewish thought. We're looking at it in linear, they're looking at it as a circle of time. I'll talk more about that later on when we get more into Jewish thought. I'll probably bring it up in my Sunday morning class eventually, too.
You're making me want to leave Conifer and come down here for the It's like we keep getting sneak previews of it all week.
Yeah, I've got all sorts of slide presentations that I'm using.
I'm supposed to teach Sunday school at Conifer, but I may just dismiss them and come down here.
Okay, anybody have any questions? If I understand this up to this point, that's where we're going to